Not guilty, Your Honor. This is a witch hunt by people who can't stand a disruptor, and I refuse to be punished for giving desperate families hope.
What happens when a predator in a white coat decides that his desire for a beachfront mansion is worth more than the lives of 50 desperate patients fighting for their survival? What kind of monster looks into the eyes of a cancer patient, promises them a miracle cure, and then hands them a bottle of poison, all while charging them their life savings? This is the story of Simon Vance, a 52-year-old fraudster posing as a holistic oncologist who spent 5 years selling a toxic concoction of industrial chemicals as a revolutionary breakthrough to the terminally ill. He built an empire on false hope, draining bank accounts and destroying families, while he dined in five-star restaurants funded by the dying breaths of his victims. But when he arrogantly walked into Judge Boyd's courtroom, adjusting his silk tie and expecting his team of high-priced defense attorneys to bury the charges in paperwork, he had no idea that the game was over. He didn't know that sitting in the front row, clutching a photo of her late mother, was Elena Rossi, the investigative journalist who had spent 2 years uncovering Vance's deadly scheme after watching her own mother wither away on his miracle protocol. It is a storm-swept Tuesday morning in the city. The rain batters against the courthouse windows, matching the somber mood inside. Judge Boyd is preparing for a case that tests the very limits of human cruelty. The defendant, Simon Vance, is charged with 50 counts of practicing medicine without a license, aggravated fraud, reckless endangerment, and involuntary manslaughter. The courtroom is suffocatingly packed. The gallery is a sea of black clothing, mourning families who sold their homes and drained their retirement funds to pay Vance, only to bury their loved ones months later. There are no whispers, only a heavy, angry silence. Along the walls, projected on screens, are the before and after photos Vance used in his marketing photos that prosecutors allege were completely fabricated using Photoshop and stock images. Simon Vance enters the courtroom as if he were stepping onto a stage for a medical conference. At 52, he is impeccably groomed, wearing a $5,000 suit and a pin on his lapel that reads, "Healer." He carries himself with the supreme confidence of a narcissist who believes he is intellectually superior to everyone in the room, including the judge. He doesn't look at the families. He doesn't look at Elena. He looks only at the cameras, offering a practiced, sympathetic smile that chills the blood. Judge Boyd does not smile. He sits behind the bench like a statue carved from ice, his eyes scanning the thick stack of evidence files before him. He has reviewed the lab reports showing high levels of arsenic and lead in Vance's supplements. He has read the autopsy reports. He looks up, his gaze locking onto Vance with a terrifying intensity. "Mr. Vance," Judge Boyd begins, his voice low but cutting through the room like a razor. "You stand before this court charged with systematically poisoning 50 vulnerable individuals under the guise of medical treatment. You are accused of extracting over $5 million from these families while accelerating the deaths of their loved ones with toxic chemicals. How do you plead?" Vance stands up, smoothing his jacket. He adopts a tone of misunderstood genius, a voice he has used to charm hundreds of victims. "Your Honor, I plead not guilty to all charges. I am a pioneer in alternative holistic therapies. The medical establishment is simply threatened by my success. What the prosecution calls poison is actually a potent, proprietary detoxification agent that the traditional mind cannot yet comprehend. I was not harming these people. I was offering them the only hope they had left." Judge Boyd slowly leans forward, his expression unchanging, but the temperature in the room seems to drop. "Mr. Vance, let's discuss this proprietary detoxification agent. In August 2023, Maria Rossi, a 60-year-old grandmother, paid you $50,000 for your level 5 protocol. According to your own financial records, you took that money and immediately transferred it to a luxury car dealership. Vance attempts to interrupt, raising a manicured hand. "Your Honor, research and development is expensive. My lifestyle is a reflection of my successful practice, which allows me to serve more clients." Judge Boyd slams a document onto his desk. The sound echoes like a gunshot. "Research, Mr. Vance. The lab report on your level 5 protocol shows it contained 40% industrial bleach and trace amounts of rat poison. You didn't buy research equipment. You bought a Lamborghini Huracan while Maria Rossi's organs were shutting down from chemical burns. That is not a misunderstood therapy. That is profit over human life. The air in the courtroom grows heavy, thick with the unsaid grief of 50 families. Judge Boyd does not wait for the echoes of his previous statement regarding the Lamborghini to fade. He gestures to the bailiff, his movement precise and sharp, signaling that the time for opening theatrics is over. It is time for the evidence to speak. Call the first witness, Judge Boyd commands, his voice devoid of warmth. Miss Elena Rossi. Elena stands. She is 32, but the last 2 years have etched lines of exhaustion into her face that make her look much older. As an investigative journalist, she is used to remaining objective, used to hunting down facts. But today, she is not a reporter. She is a daughter. She walks to the stand, clutching a thick binder of medical records, the paper trail of her mother's agonizing final months. Simon Vance rolls his eyes audibly as she passes the defense table. He leans over to one of his attorneys and whispers something that causes a smirk to flicker across his face. He treats this testimony not as a reckoning, but as an inconvenience, a misunderstanding by lesser minds who cannot grasp his genius. Judge Boyd sees the smirk. He does not react outwardly, but his pen stops moving. He stares at Vance for a long, uncomfortable second before turning his attention to the witness. Miss Rossi, Boyd says, his tone shifting from command to a clinical inquiry. Walk us through the level 5 protocol your mother purchased. What exactly was promised and what was delivered? Elena takes a shaky breath, steadying herself against the wooden railing. My mother, Maria, was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. She was terrified. The traditional doctors offered chemotherapy, but they were honest about the low survival rates. She wanted hope. And then she found Simon Vance online. Elena opens the binder, pulling out a glossy brochure. He promised a 98% cure rate. He called it cellular reset technology. He told my mother that chemotherapy was a conspiracy by Big Pharma to kill patients and that his natural serum would melt the tumors away in weeks. He charged her $50,000 up front, cash only. She liquidated her teacher's pension to pay him. And the treatment? Judge Boyd asks, his eyes narrowing. It arrived in unmarked plastic jugs, Elena says, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. It was a thick, green sludge. It smelled like a swimming pool. The first time my mother drank it, she vomited instantly. She said it felt like fire moving through her veins. When I called Mr. Vance, he told me that was good. He said, Elena pauses, looking directly at the defendant. He said her pain was proof that the toxins were leaving her body. He called it a healing crisis. At the defense table, Vance stands up, unable to contain his arrogance. Objection. The witness is not a medical professional. The Herxheimer reaction is a well-documented phenomenon in detoxification. Just because the process is uncomfortable does not mean it is ineffective. The body must purge before it can rebuild. Judge Boyd's gavel does not strike. He simply raises a hand, palm out, silencing the room instantly. Mr. Vance, you are not here to lecture on physiology. You are here to answer for the contents of those jugs. Boyd picks up a lab report from his bench, holding it up to the light. Miss Rossi describes a burning sensation. She describes the smell of a swimming pool. That aligns perfectly with the forensic chemistry report in front of me. The primary active ingredient in your cellular reset serum was sodium hypochlorite. Do you know what that is, Mr. Vance? Vance straightens his tie, looking defiant. It is an oxidizer. It cleanses the blood. It is industrial bleach, Judge Boyd corrects, his voice dropping an octave, turning colder. You were selling bleach mixed with aloe vera juice and food coloring. You weren't inducing a healing crisis. You were chemically burning the esophagus and stomach lining of a woman who was already dying. You told her the pain was healing. In reality, you were dissolving her internal organs while she paid you for the privilege. The gallery gasps. A woman in the back row sobs into her hands. Elena, Judge Boyd continues, ignoring Vance's indignant sputtering. What happened when you tried to stop the treatment? He threatened us, Elena says, tears finally spilling over. He told my mother that if she stopped drinking the solution, the cancer would explode and kill her within days. He used fear to keep her drinking the poison. By the time I forced her to go to a real hospital, the doctors said her throat was so eroded she couldn't even swallow water. She didn't die from the cancer, Your Honor. She died from starvation and internal bleeding, caused by his cure. Lies, Vance shouts, slamming his hand on the table. She didn't have the willpower. She gave up. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. Judge Boyd's eyes lock onto Vance. We will see about willpower, Mr. Vance, because the autopsy photos I have here show a stomach lining that looks like it was treated with battery acid. And unlike your brochures, autopsies do not lie. Judge Boyd sets the autopsy report aside, though its image remains burned into the minds of everyone in the room. He does not give Simon Vance time to recover from the exposure of his bleach cure. The judge picks up a new file, this one thick with bank statements and property deeds. The silence in the courtroom shifts from sorrow to a simmering anger. The court calls Mr. Arthur Keaton, Judge Boyd announces. An elderly man, stooped and leaning heavily on a cane, makes his way to the stand. His suit is old and frayed at the cuffs. He looks like a man who has lost everything, because he has. Mr. Keaton takes the oath, his voice barely a whisper, trembling with the weight of shame and grief. Mr. Keaton, Judge Boyd says, his voice softening just enough to show respect, though his eyes remain hard when they flick back to the defendant. Tell the court why you sought out Mr. Vance's services and what he told you about the cost of saving your wife's life. Arthur adjusts his glasses, his hands shaking. My wife, Linda, was diagnosed with acute leukemia. The doctors said it was aggressive. We were desperate. We saw Mr. Vance's infomercials late at night. He talked about a gold tier protocol. He said it was reserved for the most serious cases, using rare botanicals sourced from the Amazon rainforest. Vance leans back in his chair, whispering loudly enough for the front row to hear. Quality ingredients are expensive. You can't put a price on life. Arthur hears him and flinches, but continues. He told us the gold tier cost $200,000. Up front, he said insurance wouldn't cover it because the government wanted to keep it secret. We didn't have that kind of money. We were living on Social Security. But Mr. Vance, he sat in our living room, drank our tea, and told Linda that if I really loved her, I would find a way. He said, "What is a house compared to a wife?" Arthur begins to weep quietly. So I sold it. I sold the house we lived in for 40 years. I gave him the check for $200,000. We moved into a motel. Linda took his gold tier supplements for 3 weeks. She died in that motel room, in pain, while Mr. Vance stopped answering my calls. Judge Boyd turned slowly to Simon Vance. The air in the room feels electric, dangerous. Mr. Vance, you took the entire life savings of an elderly couple. You convinced a man to make himself homeless to buy a bottle of rare Amazonian botanicals. Would you like to tell the court where that $200,000 actually went? Vance stands, buttoning his jacket with indignation. Your Honor, logistics are complicated. Sourcing organic compounds requires international shipping, specialized storage, and high-level consultants. The overhead is immense. Just because the patient's biology failed to respond does not mean the product wasn't premium. Premium, Judge Boyd repeats, the word dripping with disdain. He opens the financial dossier in front of him. I have the transaction records here, Mr. Vance. On the day Mr. Keaton's check cleared, October 14th, you did not wire money to Brazil or the Amazon. You made 3 transactions. Boyd holds up a finger for each point. First, a $60,000 payment to Prestige Wine Cellars for vintage champagne. Second, a $40,000 charge for a private jet charter to Cabo San Lucas. And third, a $100,000 down payment on a beachfront condo in Miami. You didn't buy rare herbs, Mr. Vance. You bought a party. You manipulated a man into homelessness so you could drink champagne on a private jet while his wife died in a motel room. That is a gross oversimplification of corporate accounting, Vance shouts, his face turning red. My personal finances are separate from the business entity. I am entitled to a salary. Your business entity was a shell company registered to a P.O. box, Judge Boyd roars, his voice finally rising, cracking the calm facade he had maintained. There were no botanicals. The gold tier supplements were tested. Do you know what was in them, Mr. Vance? Tap water, food coloring, and sugar. You sold a dying woman sugar water for the price of her home. Vance scoffs, shaking his head. The placebo effect is a powerful tool. Belief is half the cure. I gave them belief. You gave them bankruptcy, Judge Boyd corrects, his eyes cold as steel, and you funded your vacation with their desperation. But we are not done, because there is someone else who knows exactly how you made that sugar water. Someone you thought you had paid enough to keep quiet. Judge Boyd looks to the bailiff. Bring in the next witness. The color drains from Simon Vance's face as the courtroom doors swing open. He whispers frantically to his lead attorney, his composure finally cracking. He thought his money had bought silence. He thought his non-disclosure agreements were ironclad. But walking down the aisle, flanked by federal marshals, is Marcus Thorne. Thorne is young, barely 25, wearing a rumpled shirt and the expression of a man who has not slept in weeks. He was Vance's head of production, a title that sounded impressive on the website but meant something entirely different in reality. Judge Boyd watches Vance's reaction closely. He notes the sweat beading on the doctor's forehead. Mr. Thorne, Boyd says, his voice cutting through the tension, you were granted immunity in exchange for the truth. Do not waste it. Tell the court where the miracle serum was manufactured. Thorne grips the sides of the witness stand, his knuckles white. He refuses to look at Vance. On the website, Simon, Mr. Vance, posted photos of a sterile lab in Switzerland. He used stock footage of scientists in hazmat suits. Thorne swallows hard. But we made the stuff in a rented storage unit behind a tire shop in New Jersey. Unit 4B. A ripple of shock moves through the gallery. Vance stands up, his voice shrill. Objection. This man is a disgruntled former employee. He was fired for incompetence. He is a liar. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Judge Boyd commands, his voice like a thunderclap, or I will have you gagged. Continue, Mr. Thorne. Describe the manufacturing process for the Level 5 protocol. Thorne looks down at his hands. There was no equipment, no beakers, no sterile environment. Mr. Vance would give me a shopping list for Home Depot. We bought industrial strength bleach, the kind used for cleaning swimming pools. We bought aloe vera gel in bulk from a discount store. And we bought plastic trash cans, the big gray ones. Trash cans, Judge Boyd repeats, his face unreadable. Yes, Your Honor. We mixed the formula in garbage cans using canoe paddles. We didn't measure anything. Simon said it didn't matter. He said, just make it burn enough so they think it's working. If a batch didn't smell strong enough, he'd just pour in more bleach until his eyes watered. And the gold tier? Judge Boyd asks. The Amazonian botanicals? Thorne begins to cry. That was the worst part. For the premium clients, the ones who paid the most. Simon said the bleach was too risky because they were usually weaker. So we just used tap water from the hose outside the unit. We added green food coloring and a bittering agent so it tasted medicinal. He called it the placebo profit margin. He used to laugh about it while we were bottling it. He said, if they die, they can't ask for a refund. The courtroom erupts. Families are screaming. The gavel bangs repeatedly, but Judge Boyd does not look at the crowd. He looks at Vance, who is now slumped in his chair, staring at the table. Mr. Thorne, Boyd asks, silencing the room with a raised hand. The forensic report mentioned trace amounts of rat poison in the samples. Was that an ingredient? No, Thorne whispers, his voice shaking. The storage unit. It was infested. Rats were everywhere. Sometimes they would get into the open trash cans at night and drown in the mixture. Thorne pauses, struggling to breathe. I told Simon we had to throw the batch out. I told him it was contaminated, but he screamed at me. He said the chemicals cost too much money to waste. He told me to fish the rats out with a net and bottle it anyway. He said, it's just organic matter. Tell them it's part of the detox. You monster, a voice cries out from the gallery. It is Arthur Keaton. He is held back by a bailiff, sobbing uncontrollably. Judge Boyd stares at Simon Vance with a look of absolute revulsion. You fed dying patients rat-contaminated bleach mixed in a garbage can, Boyd says, his voice dangerously quiet. And you called it medicine. You called it hope? Vance looks up, his eyes wild. It was a business. Startups have to cut corners. The intent was to scale up eventually. I was going to build a real lab once we hit 10 million in revenue. You weren't building a business, Mr. Vance, Judge Boyd says, picking up a new piece of evidence. You were building a graveyard. And speaking of cutting corners, let's discuss what you did when the patients started complaining about the side effects. Let's talk about the customer services department. Judge Boyd holds up a script. This is the script you gave your staff to read to patients who were vomiting blood. Would you like to read it to the court, or shall I? Judge Boyd holds the document up. It is a single sheet of laminated paper recovered from the raid on Vance's office. The title at the top reads, Objection Handling and Retention Script. You didn't hire nurses for your hotline, did you, Mr. Vance? Judge Boyd asks, his voice dangerously low. You hired telemarketers, you hired failed actors, and this is what you told them to say to people who were dying. Boyd begins to read, his voice devoid of emotion, which makes the words sound even more horrific. If the patient reports vomiting blood, tell them, congratulations. This is a sign of deep cellular purging. The tumor is liquefying. Do not go to the hospital. Hospitals will reverse the process with toxic drugs. Stay the course. Boyd lowers the paper, looking over his glasses at the defendant. You told people who were hemorrhaging internally that it was a celebration. You told them to avoid the only doctors who could save them. That isn't fraud, Mr. Vance. That is premeditated murder. Vance shifts in his seat, looking annoyed rather than remorseful. The medical establishment panics at the slightest symptom. They cut and burn. I was trying to protect my clients from unnecessary intervention. Pain is part of the healing arc. If they had just pushed through the pain barrier, they would have seen results. Pushed through the pain barrier? Judge Boyd repeats, incredulous. Let's listen to someone who tried to push through, shall we? Boyd nods to the clerk. Play Exhibit 4B, the voicemail from Sarah Jenkins. A recording plays over the courtroom speakers. It is the voice of a young girl, barely 18. Her voice is weak, rasping, broken by violent coughing fits. Dr. Vance, please. It's Sarah. I can't stand up anymore. My skin is turning yellow. My mom says I need to go to the ER, but you said that would ruin the protocol. I'm scared. Please call me back. I don't want to die. I'll pay the extra fee. Just please tell me what to do. The recording ends with the sound of sobbing, then a click. Elena Rossi, in the front row, lowers her head. The gallery is silent, paralyzed by the horror of the young girl's voice. Sarah Jenkins died 2 days after leaving that voicemail, Judge Boyd says, his eyes dark. She was 18. She had a treatable form of lymphoma. Her survival rate with standard care would have been 90%. With your care, 0. Boyd picks up a smartphone sealed in an evidence bag. And do you know what you did when you received that voicemail, Mr. Vance? You didn't call 911. You didn't call her parents. We recovered the text message you sent to your head of production, Mr. Thorne. Boyd reads from the screen. Sarah J. is becoming a liability. She's weak-minded and bringing down the brand image. Block her number. If she dies, make sure her mother signed the NDA. The courtroom explodes. You bastard! A father screams from the back. The bailiffs move in, but Judge Boyd does not silence the gallery this time. He lets the anger wash over the defendant. Vance looks pale for the first time. That was taken out of context. I meant we needed to protect the company from legal liability. It was a business decision. Blocking a dying teenager is a business decision? Judge Boyd asks, his voice rising, sharp as a whip. No, Mr. Vance, that is the decision of a sociopath. You blocked her number so you wouldn't have to hear her dying breath while you were browsing real estate listings in Miami. I was protecting the protocol, Vance shrieks, standing up, his composure shattering. One failure doesn't negate 50 successes. You're cherry-picking the tragedies. Where are the successes, Mr. Vance? Judge Boyd demands, slamming his hand on the bench. Show me one. Show me one single person who was cured by your bleach and food coloring. The prosecution has interviewed every single client on your list. Do you know how many are alive today? The room falls deathly silent. None, Judge Boyd says, the word hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Not a single one. You have a 100% mortality rate. You are not a healer. You are an executioner who charges admission. Vance opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. He slumps back into his chair. But you didn't just kill them, Judge Boyd continues, his fury now cold and focused. You made sure they died thinking it was their fault. You made sure they died feeling guilty for not being strong enough to survive your poison. And that brings us to the final piece of your little empire, the legacy clause in your contracts. Judge Boyd pulls out a legal document heavy with fine print. The final insult. Let's explain to the court how you tried to steal from them even after they were dead. Judge Boyd adjusts his glasses, staring at the document with a mixture of disbelief and utter disgust. The courtroom is silent, waiting for the final blow. Most predators stop when the prey is dead, Judge Boyd says, his voice cold. But not you, Mr. Vance. You wanted to make sure you got paid even after the heart stopped beating. Clause 14, Section B, the Legacy Fulfillment Agreement. Boyd reads the text aloud, enunciating every syllable. In the event that the patient transitions from the physical plane before the completion of the 12-month protocol, the patient's estate agrees that the cessation of life is a failure of the patient's biological will, not the provider's method. Therefore, the estate is liable for the remaining balance of the contract, plus a 20% reputation protection fee to cover potential negative publicity. Boyd lowers the paper. You charged dead people a fee for dying. You sued their grieving families for damaging your reputation by having the audacity to die while under your care. Vance straightens his cuffs, looking almost bored. Contracts are binding, Your Honor. We reserved production slots for these clients. When they die early, it disrupts our supply chain. The company loses revenue. That clause simply protects our bottom line. It's standard risk mitigation. Risk mitigation, Judge Boyd repeats, shaking his head. Let's see what risk mitigation looks like to a grieving husband. Call Mr. Thomas Miller. Thomas Miller walks to the stand. He is a large man, a construction worker, but he looks broken. He holds a crumpled letter in his shaking hands. Mr. Miller, Judge Boyd says softly, tell the court what happened on the day of your wife's funeral. Thomas takes a deep breath, fighting back tears. We buried Sarah on a Tuesday. It was raining. I got home. The house was empty. I was just sitting there, holding her sweater, trying to figure out how I was going to live without her. And then the doorbell rang. Thomas pauses, his jaw tightening. It was a process server. He handed me a lawsuit from Mr. Vance's company. They were suing me for $45,000, the letter said. It said Sarah had breached contract by dying in month 3 of the program. It said I owed for the other 9 months of bleach water. And it said if I didn't pay in 48 hours, they would put a lien on my house. The gallery gasps in collective horror. A juror wipes away a tear. You sued a man on the day of his wife's funeral, Judge Boyd says, turning his gaze to Vance. You sent a process server to a house of mourning to demand payment for the poison that didn't work. Vance shrugs. My legal team handles collections automatically. It's an algorithm. I don't personally oversee every invoice. If Mr. Miller had just paid the balance, legal action wouldn't have been necessary. You put a lien on his home, Mr. Vance, Judge Boyd shouts, his voice booming like thunder. You tried to take the roof over his head because his wife died. That isn't an algorithm. That is evil, pure, distilled evil. Boyd picks up another document. And you didn't just sue Mr. Miller. You sued the estate of Emily Thorne for defamation because her obituary mentioned she died of cancer. You claimed that publicly stating the cause of death was a violation of your non-disclosure agreement because it implied your cure failed. It did imply failure, Vance snaps. And that damages the brand. I have a right to protect my intellectual property. You have no rights here anymore, Judge Boyd says, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You have forfeited your right to be viewed as a businessman. You are a ghoul, Mr. Vance. You are a scavenger picking the meat off the bones of the people you killed. Vance scoffs. You are emotional, Judge. You are letting sentiment cloud your judgment. I provided a service. They signed the papers. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Buyer beware, Judge Boyd repeats slowly. Indeed, but you seem to have forgotten the other side of the law. Fraud vitiates everything. A contract built on lies is not a contract, Mr. Vance. It is a confession. Boyd leans forward. And I have one final witness who is going to turn that confession into a conviction. You thought you were smart, hiding your money in shell companies and crypto wallets. You thought the trail ended at the Cayman Islands. But you made one mistake. You fired your accountant. Vance's eyes widen. For the first time, genuine fear flickers across his face. He looks toward the back of the room. Bring him in, Judge Boyd commands. The doors open, and a man in a gray suit walks in. He does not look like a victim. He looks like a man who knows where every skeleton is buried because he dug the graves. Lawrence Sterling, Vance's former CFO, takes the stand. He adjusts his glasses, avoiding Vance's burning glare. Judge Boyd does not waste time. Mr. Sterling, you were the chief financial officer for Vance Holistic Enterprises for 4 years. You were fired 2 months ago. Tell the court why. Sterling clears his throat. I was fired because I refused to authorize a transfer of $500,000 from the Patient Emergency Fund to Mr. Vance's personal gambling account in Macau. Simon told me I lacked vision. He said the money was his to do with as he pleased. Vance jumps up. This is a violation of attorney-client privilege. He handled my legal settlements. Everything he knows is confidential. Mr. Sterling is an accountant, not a lawyer, Judge Boyd snaps. And crime-fraud exception applies here. There is no privilege for a conspiracy to commit theft. Sit down, or you will be removed in shackles. Boyd turns back to Sterling. You brought something with you today, a digital ledger titled Project Harvest. Explain to the court what Project Harvest is. Sterling nods. It was Simon's internal name for the terminal cancer wing. He didn't call them patients. He called them crops. The strategy was to harvest their assets before they expired. The ledger tracks the net worth of every applicant. If a patient had high equity in their home, they were automatically approved for the gold tier. If they had low assets, they were rejected or given the basic protocol, which was just water. The gallery is frozen in horror. The level of calculation is beyond comprehension. So the medical criteria for the treatment wasn't biology, Judge Boyd says, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. It was their credit score. Yes, Your Honor, Sterling confirms. We had a script for the sales team. If a patient said they couldn't afford the $200,000, Simon told us to ask about their life insurance policies. He tried to get patients to sign over their death benefits as payment. You tried to take their life insurance? Boyd asks, looking at Vance. Money meant to feed their children after they were gone? Vance is sweating profusely now. It was a payment plan. Creative financing. We were offering flexibility. You were betting on their deaths, Judge Boyd corrects. You knew they would die, and you wanted to be the first in line for the payout. Boyd clicks a button on his laptop. A document appears on the large screens in the courtroom. It is an email from Vance to Sterling, dated 3 years ago. Let's read your own words, Mr. Vance, Boyd says. Subject line, the whales. Text, Mrs. Henderson is fading fast. Make sure the wire transfer clears before she loses cognitive function. If she goes into a coma before paying the final installment, we lose the bonus. Push her hard. Tell her the cure is working, but she needs one final boost. Milk the cow before it collapses. The silence in the room is deafening. Then, a low, guttural sound of anguish rises from the back. It is Mrs. Henderson's son. Vance is shaking his head frantically. That is business slang. Milking the cow is a common metaphor for maximizing ROI. You are twisting my words. I am reading your words, Judge Boyd roars, standing up for the first time. He towers over the bench. You compared a dying grandmother to livestock. You rushed a transfer because you were afraid she would go into a coma before you could steal her last dollar. That is not business slang. That is the language of a predator. Boyd looks at the defense table. The attorneys are packing up their bags. They know it's over. They are distancing themselves from the blast radius. Your lawyers seem to be losing interest in your defense, Mr. Vance, Boyd says coldly. And frankly, so am I. I have seen enough financial records, enough autopsies, and enough of your business slang to make a decision. Vance looks around the room, realizing he is completely alone. You can't do this. I am a visionary. History will vindicate me. I have rights. History will remember you as a monster, Judge Boyd says, sitting back down. And as for your rights, let's discuss what you owe the people in this room. Stand up, Mr. Vance. It is time for judgment. Judge Boyd picks up the heavy wooden gavel. He holds it like a weapon. The air in the room is thin, electric. Everyone holds their breath. Simon Vance, Judge Boyd begins, his voice echoing like the tolling of a bell. You came into this court demanding respect. Now, you will receive justice. Judge Boyd looks down at Simon Vance, his expression stripping away the last shreds of the defendant's dignity. The courtroom is so quiet that the sound of the rain against the glass feels like a drumbeat. Mr. Vance, Judge Boyd begins, his voice devoid of anger, replaced by a terrifying finality. Throughout this trial, you have spoken of purging toxins and removing impurities. You claimed that to heal the body, one must aggressively excise the poison. Today, this court agrees with your philosophy, but you are not the healer, Mr. Vance. Society is the patient, and you are the cancer. Vance trembles, gripping the table. Your Honor, I can pay them back. I have assets offshore. I can set up a fund. Just don't put me in general population. I am a man of intellect. You are a man of nothing, Judge Boyd interrupts. You viewed 50 human beings not as patients, but as crops to be harvested. You looked at a dying grandmother and saw a bonus check. You looked at a grieving husband and saw a lawsuit. Judge Boyd leans forward. On the 50 counts of involuntary manslaughter and the 50 counts of aggravated fraud, the jury didn't need to deliberate. They needed to recover from the nausea of listening to you. Simon Vance, I sentence you to 20 years for each count of fraud and 20 years for each count of manslaughter to be served consecutively. That is a total of 2,000 years in the state penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole until the year 4024. Vance's legs give out. He collapses into his chair, sobbing. 2,000 years? That's absurd. That's a death sentence. No, Judge Boyd corrects him cold. It is a quarantine. We are isolating a dangerous pathogen from the public. But I am not done. Boyd turns to the financial records. You liked creative financing, Mr. Vance, so here is my order. Every single asset you own, the Miami condo, the Lamborghini, the private jet charter credits, the offshore accounts revealed by Mr. Sterling, is hereby seized. They will be liquidated immediately. You can't take everything, Vance screams. I need money for my appeal. You have no money, Judge Boyd says. I am ordering 100% restitution to the victims' families. And since your assets won't cover the emotional damage, I am invoking a special judicial order. Any income you make for the rest of your natural life, whether it be from prison, labor, or book deals, will be garnished at 100% and sent to the Maria Rossi Foundation for Cancer Research. Boyd looks at Elena in the front row. She is crying, but this time, they are tears of relief. Finally, Judge Boyd says, delivering the ultimate blow to Vance's ego. You were so obsessed with your title, you forced your staff to call you doctor even though you have no degree. Effective immediately, you are legally barred from using any medical title. In the prison records, you will be listed as inmate Vance. You are not a healer. You are not a visionary. You are a number. Take him away, Judge Boyd commands. As the bailiffs drag Vance out, he is no longer the confident man in the $5,000 suit. He is screaming, begging, blaming his lawyers, blaming the patients. But no one is listening. The heavy oak doors slam shut, cutting off his voice forever. Judge Boyd turns to the gallery. He looks at Arthur Keaton, at Thomas Miller, at Elena Rossi. This court cannot bring back the time you lost. We cannot bring back the laughter of your loved ones. But we can ensure that the man who stole those things never sees the sun as a free man again. The case is closed. Boyd strikes the gavel one last time, a sharp, definitive crack that signals the end of the nightmare. Epilogue. Simon Vance died in prison 7 years into his sentence. He spent his final years working in the prison laundry, earning 12 cents an hour, all of which was sent to the families he defrauded. He died alone in the infirmary, terrified of the very end he had exploited in so many others. Elena Rossi used the restitution money to launch a nonprofit dedicated to exposing medical fraud. Her investigative work led to the shutdown of 3 other fake clinics across the state. Arthur Keaton eventually bought a small cottage near the ocean, where he spends his days fishing. He says that sometimes, in the quiet of the morning, he can feel Linda watching over him, finally at peace. And Judge Boyd? He remains on the bench, a silent guardian in a noisy world, waiting for the next predator to walk through his doors, thinking they are above the law. Justice served, the poison is purged, and the victims are finally free.